Please be seated. How can these things be? It's a fair question for Nicodemus to ask. Jesus certainly feels a bit cryptic in his conversation with him. And even without the most famous verse in the Bible, it's a story filled with things to ponder. Much like Nicodemus, I am curious about what it means to be reborn. Ours is not a faith tradition that talks much about being born again. I'll admit that calling myself a born-again Christian is not language that comes naturally to me, but no offense for those who do. I've certainly seen loved ones experience figurative and literal rebirth, recovering from cancer, surviving car crashes, or becoming sober. My father, in particular, used that language of being reborn immediately after his stroke. In this season of tumultuous and unpredictable weather, of changes and new beginnings, of coming out and going out, I keep thinking of pilgrimage. Not just for our pilgrims leaving for Tizay this week, but all the ways we encounter pilgrimage throughout the stages of life. Going on a pilgrimage, visiting sacred places, it can be a form of rebirth. Now, this isn't to say that only the most popular sites of Christian pilgrimage are the places where this can be experienced. Even here in Wyoming, there are countless places where people have gone for thousands of years to encounter the divine, to seek wisdom, or to ask questions. After all, as we know very well in Cody, the wind blows where it chooses. But to limit the sacred in this way is to close ourselves off to the divine and to those encounters of the Spirit that are so renewing. I've been reading through the reflections on pilgrimage in the Summer Morning Star, and it's been powerful reading about the different places all over the world that people have felt and sought out the power of the Spirit. It seems often by chance or unexpectedly that places of pilgrimage become sacred. In the community of Tizay, for example, the arrival of pilgrims was almost rejected at first. Brother Roger, who founded the community, had it in mind that this would be a small community, maybe 10 brothers at the most. He really was not expecting and often didn't want the young people who started coming to visit the monastery. But as more and more people came to pray and to listen, he recognized the work of the Spirit calling them, and so worked with his fellow brothers to make it a place welcoming pilgrims. Like Nicodemus, we come at night. Nighttime, as much as it is beautiful, is a time of uncertainty. And so we go out on sacred journeys in moments of darkness, of unknowing, maybe even of doubt. We go out in these moments looking for God, seeking answers to deep questions. Sometimes it's the same sort of questions Nicodemus likely had when he came to visit Jesus. We travel on these sacred journeys, led by the Spirit of God to places where countless others have felt that Spirit. There is a saying from the Celtic tradition on pilgrimage: "To go to Rome is much trouble, little profit. The king whom thou seekest there, unless thou bring him with thee, thou wilt not find." I see it as a reminder that even in our moments of searching or uncertainty, we must not lose sight that we are always traveling with God. As the Tizay song says, "Within our darkest night, you kindle a fire that never dies away." And that's one of the beautiful and sacred things about pilgrimage. It's not a journey we take alone. Regardless of whether you go on a pilgrimage alone or with a group of others, there's usually other pilgrims at these sacred sites. The space is made sacred not just in going on the journey, but by the people who are there with you. In my own experiences leading pilgrimage or being a pilgrim, it has often been the connections made with people who started off as relative strangers who have been the most spiritually impactful. Whether I got to know them well throughout the pilgrimage or only met them in passing, those encounters have been the strongest reminder I've had that God is with me on these journeys. And it's not just whoever happens to be traveling with you or whoever happens to be at a site of pilgrimage with you. You walk this sacred journey and visit these sacred places in the presence of those who have walked this journey and visited these places for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. Pilgrimage exists in an almost liminal space, a world between worlds where the boundaries between past, present, and future get fuzzy. In the Black Hills in South Dakota is Bear Butte, close to Sturgis. It's historically a site that is sacred for many Indigenous people in North America and is still used for prayers and vision quests. All over the butte, there are prayers and tobacco offerings tied to the trees. There's also a single hiking path that's open to hikers. In 2013, as part of the preparation for a Tizé gathering on the Pine Ridge Reservation, those of us who were organizing the event visited Bear Butte. Now, I have to admit, I'm not the best hiker, but getting up and down is pretty easy even for someone like me. In that moment, filled not only with the presence of the pilgrims who I was there with, but the presence of countless others who have visited that sacred mountain, it was all I could do to keep from singing hymns. It's not unlike celebrating the Eucharist. We say those prayers in that moment with everyone who has ever, is currently, or will ever say those prayers. Pilgrimage brings us outside of the familiar, helping us experience rebirth. It puts us outside of our comfort zone. Being in parts of the world we don't know very well, the exciting and sometimes unpleasant stress of traveling, sleeping on a bed that isn't your own, carrying only what you need, adjusting to new habits and daily rhythms. It's a lot of letting go that one has to do in those moments. When you can't as easily be on autopilot, you notice more. You pay attention more to what's around you. You also pay more attention to yourself. Living outside of what's familiar, it's often easier to recognize old patterns and assumptions, to see things that need to change, to even see things that have already begun to change. In my own experiences as a pilgrim, it's not always massive, lightning strikes the ground kind of big changes that can happen, but rather it's catching glimpses of patterns or different facets of a gem as the light bounces off of it. But it's glimpses that outside of pilgrimage are harder to catch, and it's glimpses that can be life-changing. Much like Nicodemus, these moments of rebirth leave us usually with more questions than when we started. The answers are never as straightforward as we'd like them to be. Being led by the Spirit of God seems at times to bring you from one moment of darkness to the next. You enter a sacred space, walk on a sacred journey, seeking answers to deep questions. The experience changes you and fills you with the Spirit. Now what? Pilgrims are not called to stay in the places they travel, and this is something that the brothers of Tizé talk about regularly. Whether it's at Tizé proper or any of their gatherings across the world, part of the conversation with their pilgrims centers on how to bring the presence and experiences from Tizé with them as they journey home, or ways to connect with other pilgrims once that pilgrimage ends. It's not an easy question to answer. It's one that I and countless other pilgrims across time have wondered. You experience this glimpse of rebirth, but what do you do with it? How do you live into that spiritual rebirth? Personally, I take comfort and reassurance in the moments that remind me of rebirth. Like in baptism, in that moment in the service when we are all called to renew our baptismal vows. Now, I was baptized as an infant, so unfortunately I don't remember that moment when the priest poured water on my head and marked me as Christ's own forever. But I do remember when I was confirmed, when we renewed those vows. And I remember the times I have renewed those vows with others in different communities who have been baptized. It's been a reminder that being born of the Spirit is an ongoing experience. To be led by the Spirit, to be a child of God, it's not a one-and-done deal. The life and rebirth of the pilgrim doesn't end. The pilgrimage continues. In just a few moments, we will be commissioning our pilgrims who are going to Taizé this week, and we will be blessing and praying for our graduates. As they enter this liminal space of pre-pilgrimage, actual pilgrimage, post-pilgrimage, of high school and university to that great mystery that is adult life, I pray that we, with them, will find and cherish those moments of in-between in our own lives and listen to the blowing wind.